folks, HR Funk here. Now you may be wondering why I have a target hanging behind me in my shop. Now if you know me and you just think that's my idea of home decoration, normally you'd be right. But today I have it hanging there for a different reason. I want to talk about something that will help people improve their shooting. It's something as a firearms instructor that I've recommended to people many times over the years. It's something that really doesn't cost you anything other than some time, and it really can make a dramatic improvement in your shooting. What I'm talking about is dry fire practice. You can do dry fire practice with most firearms. I would caution you against it with rim fires, like 22 rim fires. Now some of them will specifically say it's okay to dry fire them, but there is a possibility that you can do a little bit of damage to your firearm if it's a rim fire and you're dry firing it. But with most center fire firearms, you can dry fire them without any cause for concern about damage to your firearm. What I'm going to be doing in just a couple of minutes is a little bit of dry fire practice with my Smith&Wesson M&P here, and then I'm going to start to talk about a new product that can help you maximize the value of your dry fire practice. Before we actually start our dry fire training, I want to talk a little bit about safety considerations when we're dry firing, particularly when we're dry firing inside. First and foremost, check your firearm visually and physically. Check your magazine. Make absolutely certain you have an empty handgun or rifle. If you have a round inside there and you start to do what you believe is going to be dry firing, it's quickly going to become live fire. If you're doing that in your home, inside any building, or anywhere where there are people around, at very least, that could be embarrassing. And at most, it could be potentially very dangerous to other people. So check your firearm first. Make sure it is completely empty. Next, make sure when you're dry firing that you're doing it in front of a backstop, that if somehow the pistol or rifle would discharge, that you have a good backstop that would prevent that bullet from doing any type of harm. Here I have the cinder block wall behind here. I'm in the basement, so if somehow the bullet made it through the cinder block, it's going to go into the dirt on the other side. So I have a good safe place to dry fire here. Remember, rule number 1 for firearm safety, always keep your firearm pointed in a safe direction. A safe direction is any direction that, if you were to fire, would not cause any damage to persons or property that you're concerned about damaging. So again, the first consideration when we're talking about dry fire practice is safety. Make sure your firearm is empty. Make sure you have a good, safe backstop to practice your dry fire with. Next, to maximize the benefit of your dry fire time, you should use any support gear that you normally would have when you're actually shooting live fire on the range. Any holsters. For police officers, you should be wearing your vest, any type of tactical gear that you might wear, because that way you are practicing shooting with everything that you would normally have, so that all of a sudden, if you are live firing, you don't all of a sudden find out that you can't get into the proper stance that you were in, or something is snagging or whatever. This is also a good time to practice your presentation of the firearm from wherever you normally carry it, whether it's concealed, whether it's an open holster, or wherever. You get a chance to practice that along with the shooting portion or the dry firing portion of your training. The same rule goes for dry fire practice with a rifle, particularly if you're a high power shooter like I am. You should have on your shooting jacket, you should have on your sweatshirt. Everything that you normally would wear when you're shooting on the range, you should be wearing when you're practicing your dry fire practice. When I dry fire with my rifle in the backyard, that's exactly what I do. I'm completely dressed just like I was in a match, so that I'm practicing exactly the way that I'm going to perform. You want to make sure you're doing that, again, to maximize the benefit of your dry fire practice time. Now, why is dry fire practice so beneficial? It's simply because of this. The key to accurate shooting is trigger management. If you can maintain proper sight alignment, meaning the front sight is in proper orientation with the rear sight, and proper sight picture, meaning both sights are in proper orientation with your target, and you can maintain that proper sight alignment and sight picture through the trigger squeeze to the point where the trigger breaks, and even after the trigger breaks, you'll be able to fire an accurate shot, meaning the bullet is going to strike your point of aim within the accuracy parameters of whatever type of rifle or pistol you're shooting. Now, in the explanation of that and in listening to that, it probably doesn't sound all that tough. However, when you start to actually shoot, and particularly when you're shooting a firearm that's going to recoil when you fire it, that becomes a little bit more of a challenge. In fact, you really have to work to master that trigger management and make sure you're maintaining your sight alignment and you're not anticipating the recoil and giving the pistol a push. You're not squeezing with your fingers while you're squeezing the trigger and pulling the front sight down out of relationship with the rear sight. You've got to make sure you're not pushing with the heel of your hand and raising the muzzle. There are all kinds of different things you can do to disturb that sight alignment while you're trying to properly squeeze the trigger. That is what dry fire will help you maintain. And that is what we're going to talk about in just a moment. So when we're performing dry fire practice, what we're actually doing is attempting to get a perfect trigger squeeze each and every time we cycle the pistol and squeeze off a simulated shot. So with my target back here, when I start to shoot, I want to get into a good shooting stance, and I realize you can't see the shooting stance as I'm doing this, but you want to get into a good shooting stance. You want to have a good proper grip on the target. You want to see your sights. Make sure you have proper sight alignment, proper sight picture, and you watch that front sight and squeeze off a perfect shot. There was absolutely no movement in my front sight at the point the trigger broke, and I also want to follow through, meaning I want to maintain that sight alignment even after the trigger breaks. Now, when you're shooting live ammunition, the firearm is going to recoil, so you really are not going to be able to maintain your sight alignment after the point that the trigger breaks. But mentally, that's what your focus needs to be. You want to think about and concentrating on maintaining that sight picture, that perfect sight alignment and sight picture, even after the trigger breaks. So again, when we dry fire, we line everything up, come up, proper sight alignment, sight picture, and perfect trigger press each and every time. And you do that over and over and over again. If you do that, you will get to the point where when you start to live fire, you also will be able to line up your sights and perfectly squeeze that trigger so that there is no movement in your pistol as the shot breaks or as the trigger releases. Once you've developed your shooting skills to the point where you can maintain that perfect sight picture all the way through the squeeze of the trigger and there's no movement in your sights, then you can start to speed it up and work on coming up, getting on your sights, and squeezing off the shot even faster without any movement in the sights of your pistol. If you're shooting a rifle, same exact thing. You can work on coming up, getting on the sights, squeezing off a trigger. This is also going to work with red dot sights. If you have poor shooting technique, it really doesn't matter what kind of a sighting system. You can have the Hubble mounted to the top of your handgun or your top of your rifle, and if you're jerking the trigger and pulling it out of alignment, the Hubble isn't going to help you out, okay? You really have to be able to maintain that positioning of whatever sighting system you have all the way through the trigger squeeze, and again, mentally, you want to concentrate on trying to maintain that proper sight alignment even beyond the point where the shot breaks. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I've been a proponent of dry fire practice for a long time. If you caught my video from last weekend's NRA show, you may remember, however, that I was speaking to a young man about something called the Mantis Training System. And I actually purchased that system and brought it home specifically to work with dry fire. Now, the Mantis system also works with live fire, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But for practicing by yourself, particularly indoors, in your home, I think this is a very valuable tool, and we're going to take a look at it. This is essentially the Mantis training system. It is just a small unit. It has a power button on the bottom and a small LED that flashes. I'll show you that in a minute. But it fits onto the utility rail of your pistol or your rifle. Basically anything that will fit a standard 1913 Picatinny rail will fit the Mantis training system. Now once it goes on there, I have a screw that slides through, and you really don't even need to use the screw if you're dry firing, but if you're doing live fire, definitely use the screw because that's going to keep the Mantis system from being jettisoned off the front of your firearm. And I'm just going to tighten down the screw. And since I'm dry firing, I'm not going to tighten it down terribly tight. Just tight enough to keep it on there, keep it from moving around. And again, this is the Mantis system, but the other thing that allows it to help you with your shooting is actually a free download from the App Store to your iPhone or your Android, or in this case, I'm going to be using my iPad, and I'll show you that in just a moment. And here is the Mantis system. I have it loaded up on my iPad. You can see it's waiting to connect. I've got the connect button right there. In order to pair it with the system on my pistol, I first have to push the small button so that the LED starts to flash. Then I push the connect button, and this is now connected to the unit on my pistol. In order to calibrate this, you have to lay the pistol down or the rifle down so that it's not moving at all, and it will calibrate the system. And once it's ready, you can see here that it has a little green button to start the system. Now, when I perform my dry fire training, you can see I've got this screen up, and all I have to do is push the start button to start to work on shooting, start working on my dry firing. So I'm going to put this down right here. And I push the start button so it's ready to go. I'm going to line up a shot just like I was doing before. And now I can take a look at the system, and I can see that shot, or as I was pressing the trigger, I actually pulled the shot a little bit low and to the left, which is exactly where my bullet is going to print on the target. So what I want to do, and I can switch down here to the learn and push low and to the left, and it'll tell me what I did wrong that caused the shot to go low and to the left. Excuse me, it went low and to the right. I keep saying low and to the left, went low and to the right. So I can look at that. I can help diagnose what I'm doing and what I can do to improve that. Now, in order to really get a good idea, you should do 10 shots. So I'm going to fire a few more here. And then we can start to see trends in the shooting. Okay, a little bit better. That was a 92.2. Shot broke a little bit low, but not too bad. $91.2. $96.7. I'm getting better. $92.9. Again, this system really, you see that score of your trigger squeeze every time, and it really helps you to focus because you're trying to get that number to go higher and higher. What I'm going to do now is come up and fire some quicker shots. Just come up, get on the sights, and squeeze off a shot and see where we are there. And you can see when you do that, it becomes that much more difficult. That was a 78.4. That was a 99.5. Oops. Back to being human again. Back down to a 78. and a 93.6. So you can see each time that you fire this, or that you simulate firing, I'll try to get this so you can see it. The icons on here show where the shot broke or if it was dead center in the target, which is what these indicate right here, and it shows you the numerical value of that shot. Again, if you want to go through the different screens, this will help show you each shot graphically represented. You can look at each individual shot and see how that was. By the way, there's that 99.5. Everything, once I got into the target, everything was nice and tight. And that was a quick trigger squeeze too, so I'm kind of proud of myself. The green line is basically the movement in the muzzle before you start the trigger press. The yellow line, which you can see down in the middle there, is the actual trigger press, or it's actually the trigger break, and then the red line shows the movement of the muzzle after the trigger breaks. And you can see that's all very tight in there. Very good trigger press. My rating on this was a 93.4, which is not bad. The instructions for this basically said that it's impossible for a human being to get a 100% squeeze on here, or a 100% trigger pull on here. So far I've had a 99.5 and a 99.6, and I'm going to get 100% before it's all said and done. Again, I think the Mantis Firearms Training System has a lot of potential benefit. I think it can really help you as a shooter. I think dry fire practice, just to begin with, really can help dramatically improve your shooting. I think this takes dry fire practice to the next level. Now, the only thing that dry fire practice doesn't do is help you with recoil management. But because the Mantis Firearms Training System can be attached to the pistol and used, or to the rifle, and used during live fire, you can do this same exact thing when you're shooting, when you're firing multiple shots. And it can track each and every trigger pull and help you to figure out what you need to do to keep each and every shot right where you want it. Oops, sorry folks, you caught me going back trying to get that perfect 100 score. The Mantis Firearms Training System sells for $150, and that buys the unit that attaches to your firearm and a small recharging cord. This recharges through the USB connection to your computer, by the way, so it's nothing more difficult than you would have with charging a cell phone. I think that's a very reasonable price. You can look online for the Mantis Firearms Training System and find their website. They have a lot of information there. They also have contact information if you want to get a hold of them and ask some questions to the people that actually build this thing. So, in any regard, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative. And if you decide to give this thing a try, I think you're going to like it. I do. And with all of the shooting that I do and all the shooting I've done over the years, to have a little gizmo like this, that it's fun, and it really does help improve your shooting. I'm convinced of that just in the few days that I've been using it. So in any regard, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, leave those below. And as always, until next time, good shooting. Now I'm going to get that 100.